The purpose of formal education is something that is often heavily debated, and by looking at the natural progression of school to work and the structure of which school is composed, it becomes obvious that school exists to prepare children for joining the workforce in the future. The grading system itself is an example of this, as it serves as a sort of assessment of one's abilities to complete tasks and retain given information, meeting deadlines, and following directions. These are all things that somebody will need to use in their future, career, and otherwise. However, the systems of schooling in America are notoriously ableist, especially in regards to students with their mental disabilities. As I just stated in Academic Ableism by J. Timothy Dolmage, the Associate Professor of English at the University of Waterloo and founding editor of Canadian Journal of Disability Studies, disability has always been constructed as the inverse or opposite of higher education, or in more layman's terms, education has a standard and everything other than that is noted as a lower education, or more popular term, special education. In earlier levels of schooling, it is often that these students are isolated from the rest of the population and deprived of social interaction with a large group of children their age. This could be seen as something maliciously done, even preventing them from learning how to socialize with the majority of the populace as early on as a preventative measure for interaction in the future. The result of this could stunt their workplace communication and ability to make social connections with others. This likely began as a form of eugenic education, where students that were not considered to be competitors in natural selection, according to Darwin's theories, were isolated and given a segregated and lesser education. These students included men of color, women, and the mentally disabled, all to separate them from what they considered to be superior white males. This practice is largely considered to be discontinued, although people with mental disabilities are often given different classes in as early as elementary school and given recess at different times as well, even more isolating them from their peers. Furthermore, things like standardized tests serve as a separate issue as well, as most companies that distribute said tests say that the test only measures your ability to take that specific test. It gives way to its purpose of gauging how adept the student is at fulfilling a specific task. It is said that these tests assess one's critical thinking, however, many questions are very specific and unaccommodating to different thought processes. These tests essentially are designed to allow colleges to pick and choose the most, what some might call, academic of neurotypical students, so that their college may gain prestige. The scores themselves are largely unreliable to assess someone's actual skill. For example, there's a clear tendency for white students to score higher than students of color. However, concerning mental disabilities, there's a large disproportion between scores. Students with mental disabilities are often at a disadvantage in many of these situations, struggling with motivation, stimulus, and understanding. The way that standardized tests sort their scores also goes back to the idea of eugenics, where, as Dolmage references, most students in their top 20 are isolated from the rest of the population in a more elite form of segregation that leads to what political scientist Charles Murray calls cognitive homogamy, where the upper echelon of academia participates in a weird form of inbreeding that leads to what could be seen as a more elite educational average among that. A large majority of exclusion within the system comes later on in academia as well, when looking at higher education in college. Most colleges, especially ones that are noteworthy and will better secure you a job in the future, expect a full load of classes and in turn a full 40 hours or so of work to be done at home, as well as ample community service and job on the side. In the college environment, it is not uncommon to see neurotypical students skipping meals, working for hours on end, and going nights without sleep to complete coursework. This is especially true when it comes to weeder classes, which are designed to test the mettle and endurance of even the most capable students. This is much more difficult for the neuroatypical students, who cannot thrive under such conditions and oftentimes find themselves extremely disadvantaged at the collegiate level in a system that actively works against them. Oftentimes, the solution to this problem is to give students more time to complete the test, and while that may help students, it does not help engage or accommodate their differences in learning. For example, ADHD students have trouble focusing for a long period of time, and extending that time does not increase their engagement. It only extends the time that their attention could be drawn away from the test in. Amy Tan in Mother Tongue notes that because of her first language, she had difficulty with certain aspects of the English class that were not structured in a way that she could easily grasp. Richard Rodriguez also holds to a similar sentiment when in Aria he notes how his inability to speak English initially held him back until he eventually had to give in and took on the language. Both authors note that any sort of other in the world of academia is met with great resistance and can lead to failure within the system, requiring them to relent and even conform. This is especially true when it comes to mentally disabled students who may not even have the option or ability to conform. The inability to conform is most easily explained when looking at physically disabled students. With students confined to wheelchairs, it is occasionally the case where a small elevator must be installed when a ramp cannot exist in that space. In most elementary and high schools, these elevators are locked and require outside assistance to use, making them majorly inaccessible by even the people that need them. This is a sort of ableism in itself, as most students can enter and leave areas like the gym, while those in wheelchairs must wait for assistance. The reason that these machines are often locked is also actually due to neurotypical students, mainly that their entitlement to use and tendency to wreck the mechanism. This is especially true when it comes to considering high school students and their high vandalism rates, and this would also render the elevator unusable, yet it remains difficult to access by disabled students on a day-to-day basis, even when it is protected by being locked. A solution to this situation would be to destigmatize more progressive schools with more inclusive methods that could accommodate these students in a way that would help them to succeed in their careers along the line. Schools where disabled students would be allowed to interact with others, as well as be taught with methods that could further their understanding. These schools would also need to accommodate any physical inaccessibility. Other viable options would not romanticize colleges that perpetuate an idea of school that consists of working students to the bone and making it near impossible for anyone to get in and succeed, especially for neuroatypical students. Everyone should have access to an equal education where they can gain the skills that will enable them to succeed in the workforce. The blatant and long-standing academic ableism within the American school systems is unacceptable and needs to be resolved.